All right, Justin. So I got here a diagram showing just, man, a flow chart, and it doesn't have yield staking. So I'm a little bit lost. Can you explain what's going on here?
Sure thing. Yeah, this is sort of the high level diagram of the liquid staking that I've been setting up, and it really shows more of how the I think technology works and how the flow goes between the different contracts. And as we were talking about earlier, for anyone who doesn't know, a contract in block in the EVM sense or the smart contract sense is really just a tiny program, and you can make it do anything that a program can do within some certain constraints. But one of those things is that it can't be very large, so there are like size constraints,
Okay.
and so you end up. It actually is somewhat of an advantage also because it's distributed, so you're saving these things in a lot of places. But then you also build your application in a way so that you have all these different pieces of the application talking to each other, and it makes it composable. And each piece can handle different things. So the sort of uh, the high level overview of this on the top left is the user, and the very first thing that they would do is mint an NFT through an NFT contract that I'm calling the combination. And the combination would produce a token ID, and then that arrow off to the right is where the initial delegation would happen through a contract that I'm calling the lock. And the lock unlocks the locker, which is the one on the very far right there. And then that is what actually ends up doing the staking to the SFC, which is the special fee contract on Fantom that handles all the staking, and then would also be able to make governance votes on the right there. And sort of the way that it works is using this function called create2, which is the second version of create, that lets you create a deterministic deployment address for a contract. And basically, what that means is through some fancy math, you're able to know where a contract will be deployed before it's actually deployed there. And you do that by providing some unique values to it. And so, if you provide those same unique values multiple times, you'll end up producing the exact same deployment address. And I was able to take advantage of this by taking the token ID from the combination NFT on the top left, passing that through the lock, which is able to create this ephemeral, so it's like temporarily existing contract using create2, so that I can always generate the same address on the locker for that token ID, and then use that exact same address every time to interact with the SFC or the governance contracts or other contracts on the network as that NFT as a way. So, like, if you think of it, that token ID is now the abstraction to the user, because if I mint that token ID when I interact through the lock with it, it's my actions on it, but I can transfer that token ID to you, and now you can perform those actions because you own that NFT. So what that ends up opening up is the opportunity for the stakes that you're making to actually be liquid. Um, and they are still unique positions though, so it's a little bit different from an NF or from an ERC20 or something, a fungible token, because you're going to be locking different, you might, or delegating, I'm sorry, different amounts of Fantom, locking it or not locking it for different amounts of time, different validators that will impact the rewards that it's receiving. And those are really all things that are non-fungible, because those are unique properties of that staking position. So we can take that staking position, turn it into an NFT, but then uh, by using the token ID and create2 to create the same address to interact with the SFC, the rewards for that staking position are now tied to the NFT. So if I stake for a year to get the maximum rewards, but in 6 months I decide that I want to get out of the position and I actually need the FTM for something else, instead of having to unlock it, losing all the bonus rewards, half of your base rewards to be able to undelegate your stake, you could just sell the NFT to somebody else. And maybe they end up getting a good deal on it because you want to get out of the position early, but you get a good deal because those rewards don't all get slashed. So there is going to be some pricing calculations to figure out when a position is better than others to acquire. But that's like one part of the liquid part of this. And then the second liquid part of it is in the middle there, the liquid FTM. And so I made it also mint an ERC20 token that is a fungible token from your delegated stake. And it just, very similar to how SFTM in theory would work. I'm doing it a bit differently, but it basically decouples the underlying collateral so that you mint a synthetic asset based on the underlying collateral. So now we have the staking position is liquid, can be transferred and sold on a marketplace. And then the underlying collateral can also be decoupled and it's also liquid. So you could take those tokens and swap them for something else. The caveat being that you're not able to undelegate the underlying FTM until you repay the synthetic liquid FTM debt. And that means that you can transfer or sell. The idea is really probably for there to be a marketplace for those NFTs that have a synthetic debt and have an unlocked underlying stake. So now you have an indebted token that has underlying backing, but the person may not. They may have taken the synthetic asset, swapped it for something else, and they're doing their thing. They can sell that NFT as liquidity for swapping liquid FTM back to FTM by undelegating from the SFC. And the big difference, this is it's all built on top of native Fantom staking, which I think is well done and pretty creative. And I was just trying to think of ways to improve upon it and optimize on some of it. And so one big difference with all of this is that the native Fantom staking is tied directly to a user address. So if you mint a synthetic asset from your stake, you're the only person that can pay it back. By using an NFT to represent that position, you can mint a synthetic asset from it, have a debt on the NFT for it, but then sell that NFT to somebody else so that they can repay the debt on it and undelegate the underlying FTM. And then there's also, the approved contract thing on the top right there is meant to be purposely ambiguous. You can have an approval system so that you could set it up so that you can say, hey, I want such and such contract from such and such DAO to be able to interact with my token ID on my behalf to do something. So that might be voting, that might be something else. So there's other creative things that you can start doing by making it composable and transferable. But I think I glossed over it or talked about it quickly, but the biggest things are really that you can transfer the NFTs and they're not tied to a user address. So you don't have to be the person to pay back the synthetic debt on it.
So it's almost like a lien in essence, right? Because let's say you want to buy a used car and all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, cool, I'm getting this cool car. Why is this so cheap? And then all of a sudden you buy wait, somebody borrowed money against it. That's some
Right.
BS. So
Which
this is yeah.
though, unlike that, not to I don't want to scare people off.
No,
In that situation, you're like, what? I got a car with a lien on it. In this case, I'm making it, I don't know, I can go back to the top left there, on-chain metadata. So all of the idea too, a little bit in the middle, down below the NFT, the idea is that
metadata.
all of these properties are available on-chain. I'm going to do an on-chain metadata, an on-chain image for it. The marketplaces, I'm working with PaintSwap and other, not specifically on this, but just in general, we've been talking about that's why they're working on the NFT lockers, because when you're dealing with financial assets locked behind an NFT, you want to make sure that those values aren't changing if you're selling it. So we've been just in general thinking about things like that, which is why I think it's important to be able to check all of this stuff on chain. So unlike the car where you later find out from some bank that there's money owed or whatever, in this case, you'd be able to see that there is this debt associated with this NFT, and that actually might be the reason that you're buying it. You might actually be buying that debt so that you can use it as liquidity to convert the synthetic asset back to the underlying FTM. So you could actually look at this in several different ways too, right? Because you're locking FT. It's sort of like a futures in a way, because you can lock stuff up for a certain period of time behind the NFT, and it's a certain amount of value. You can also the other, I forgot to mention this. The other thing this lets you do is right now, if you want to valid or delegate to a validator, you can only delegate once per validator. And so if you wanted to lock, you have to choose, I'm going to lock all my money for like 6 months or whatever.
Yeah.
Through this system, you could like mint one NFT for 100 FTM locked for 6 months, another NFT for 100 FTM locked for 3 months, and another FTM for 100 FTM not locked at all. And then, you're obviously getting lower rewards than if you locked 300 FTM for 6 months or whatever it is. But you can undelegate the 100 one. You only have to wait, 3 months for so you can sort of customize how you want the staking to work for you. And then if you want out, you could sell them.
So the innovation is pretty much allowed through this create to proxy. The fact that you can mint it and then like lock it, but it always points more or less. Well, it always points to the same locker, which is kind of like a location as to where this is.
Yeah, it's like you could think of it like a location. Like it tells you where to find that contract, and it's the other. There's two technical pieces that make it possible. The first is create to for the deterministic deployment address, and then the ephemeral minimal proxy is the other part. So without getting too technical, there's basically a way of saying, I'm going to deploy this same contract to lots of places, but I don't want to like clog up the blockchain by putting the code for it in all those places. I'm going to put it in one place, and then I'm just going to tell the other ones to like look there for the code, but like store all of their data in a different place. And that says like the data is going to, or the code is going to be the same for these contracts. So like why deploy it over and over and over again? So that's a minimal proxy because you're just deploying the minimum amount of code to proxy it to the real code. The ephemeral part of it means that I'm doing that and then deleting it at the end of the transaction, which a lot of people don't realize that you can delete a smart contract, but you can. And so the other thing that does is when it's like some weird behavior of the EVM and Solidity, if you delete a variable that you're using, it gives you that gas back with some limits. So you're actually able to deploy this contract and then delete it at the end, and then the EVM gives you the gas back because you're deciding not to save it. And it's like, that's cool. You're not going to use up space on the blockchain, so here's the gas back. So it ends up being, relatively inexpensive to interact through this contract that's deployed just for you, because it's only existing during the time of your transaction.
That's something I gotta go back in my mind. Like you kind of like deploy it in essence, but you're not like fully utilizing it.
It literally says, hey, deploy this, run this code, and then at the end of it, delete it. So
Okay, I think I understand that now. So it's more of like a guide, a map, but it doesn't have to like live on the blockchain. So you're pretty much saying
it's actually I there's other advantages to doing it this way. There's the storage and gas usage, and then it's also nice that in between you interacting with your locker address, it actually doesn't exist on the chain for anyone else to interact with. So like nobody can write an exploit against it because it's not there. They would have to go through the lock. And so it does sort of reduce the attack vectors and the places that you have to look for things to happen, because like the actual place where the calls can be made to the SFC, to the governance contract, to other contracts, the code isn't there for anyone else to mess with while you're not paying attention to it.
Is this construct, everything that you're working on right here, is that specific to, let's say, taking your Fantom and staking it with a validator, or can this get applied to different projects as well?
This is made for Fantom native staking. However, the idea is that is somewhat guaranteed, or it's a little bit safer than throwing money into like random things and seeing what goes up 1,000% or whatever. There is like the predefined rules about staking rewards, but you're now able to mint the liquid FTM synthetic token out of it, and that synthetic token is backed by the delegated FTM. So you can use that liquid FTM to swap for some other token that you want to farm or whatever. And the idea is that you'd then be able to take advantage of securing the network by doing a delegated stake. You get to participate in the decentralized governance, and then you're also able to free up the underlying collateral to do whatever DEGEN stuff you want. If you make terrible decisions and you're not able to pay back the debt. At least you can now sell that NFT position on the marketplace to get something back. This code isn't applicable to like just plugging onto another token necessarily, or some other protocol. This pattern is applicable to other things that you can do. So like I mentioned before, the paint swap NFT lockers uses similar code to this. The new stuff that Revest is working on is using a similar pattern to this. Another project that I work on called Mouse is using this same pattern. And it's funny because a lot of this stuff actually came from the Mouse NFT project, MOWSE. The idea with that is that we wanted people to be able to customize the image for their NFT and make their own avatar. And so what we ended up doing with it, and this all, I got sidetracked with this liquid staking, but I want to work on Mouse and finish this up soon. I have all the proof of concept code working, but we made all of the individual attributes their own NFTs. So, all the different glasses, all the different hats, all the different shirts or whatever, their own NFTs with that image fragment stored on the blockchain. So all of it's 100% on chain. And then through this similar pattern, your Mouse NFT is the same as the combination NFT. And instead of making delegated stakes, it can own these NFT attributes that we're calling mouseware. And if your NFT owns these other mouseware NFTs, then you're able to put them on and wear them and customize the image that's generated on chain from the underlying NFTs, which I think is pretty cool. And then if you like transferred your mouse or sold it or whatever, all of the associated attribute NFTs that belong to it would go with it. And then we went wild and added all sorts of tokens and staking and making nesting so that you can make baby mouse based on some genetic stuff using the randomness that I wrote, and XP attributes, kind of like rarity, but we want to make it this sort of composable ecosystem so that other people can write game contracts that plug into like the overall mouse stuff. So we ended up kind of going a little bit wild with it, and Rhino's been making some like cool UI stuff for it. We're going with like a sort of retro gaming sort of feel because I like the 8-bit vibe. But so I mean that's why like this exact pattern, not necessarily because it's sort of customized for doing the staking, but like similar pattern using Create2, using minimal proxies to do these addresses and stuff, can be used in creative ways on games, DeFi, all sorts of stuff.
So I'm going to take all those concepts and just throw it right back at you at how I understand it. That this concept helps out a lot with staking Fantom and having the ability to like stake it, but then also be able to sell it, have a synthetic, and not only you be responsible for paying it back, but likewise just sell your position and find a fair value, however it may be. Yet this concept right here as a concept can apply to multiple different areas, as you just mentioned, can apply to NFTs, and that opens up a whole other aspect of it. We already see Reverse Finance as to how they're implementing their FNFTs with Liquid Driver. So the innovation that's right here is a big thing. Now,
and it's an abstraction. I think a good way to sort of sum it up is anything that you would normally think of being tied to an address, like owning an NFT or having a curve position or anything that's like you would normally think of as a user wallet owning. This lets you transfer that to a contract address that is owned by owning the NFT for it. So you're able to, because you can transfer an NFT, you can transfer that thing that used to be tied to a wallet. It's now tied to the NFT. And so it's a layer of abstraction between the user and that lock.
So it's just more like of an asset that can get traded more fluidly and being able to sell it. And whatever is decided to be placed into that asset is up to the developers just moving forward. And as you mentioned, it could be the NFT. It could even be like with the curve, which a lot of people, and that's what got me down this path, right, of FNFTs, was the concept like, dude, maybe I don't want to lock up for 4 years. Using traditional finance can be applied to that as well, such as what if you know that the rewards are coming down the line and you can like borrow against it, leverage
Mhm.
it, sell it at a better discount, et cetera, et cetera. So, um,
And yeah, I mean, that's the other thing I've been thinking about is like this similar designs to this open up like cool ways to do OTC trading and stuff, but of bundled assets.
mhm.
So if you wanted to say like, okay, I want to sell you, you know, 10 Boo tokens and 20 Spirit and whatever other things, and I'm going to throw in this JPEG of a cat. Um, like right now, that's just like sort of a weird transaction, but you could actually bundle all that up behind an NFT, have it be really obvious that those are the things behind it, and then sell that
Oh,
for whatever the underlying value is worth. It could be a bundle of NFTs. It could be a bundle of tokens. It could be a mixture of all these things.
dude, could you imagine like an auction out there? Like you have an NFT out there on PaintSwap. It's like, dude, did Justin just offer me like 100 Boo tokens, some Spirit tokens, and this one random token I've never heard? Like, did he really just?
You can,
Okay.
yeah, you can totally do stuff like that. And I mean, what's even more interesting is like you don't have to own the NFT. Like at some point, you could say like ancestral humans can now do this thing, and like if you own one of those, it can interact with this other token to create an address that can do this thing. So you can, yeah, it's sort of it. Abstraction is like a computer science term a lot, but it really just means like providing a layer, a separation layer between things. So instead of having them be locked together, they're now a little bit separate, and they still plug together, but it lets you plug them together in creative ways to do creative things that you haven't been able to do before.
So, okay, I'm already going down further down the track. I don't even know if this is possible. Just what's coming to my mind, I'm going to say. So there is the concept of flash loans, right? Where you can like borrow something and do it. Could you potentially have like a flash loan on a bundle NFT and be like, okay, I'm going to quickly borrow this, gain access to that, go here, go there?
So a flash loan wouldn't, you couldn't bundle that inside an NFT because flash loans are very weird in that they have to be borrowed and paid back in the same transaction.
Okay.
And if you can't pay them back in that transaction, then they revert. So you
Hmm.
have to be able to say, I want 100. And this is why you see a lot of exploits, because people will say, I'm going to borrow 100 million tokens, invest them in this thing, and then within the same transaction, they're going to be worth more money. And a lot of times that ends up being an exploit. But the reason that they exist are for things like arbitrage, and there are legitimate finance reasons to do things like that. But because it has to be within one transaction, you couldn't necessarily lock it up within within an NFT. But you could have an NFT that accesses that like special rates, or a contract where like only you can get flash loans of a token from this place. That's sort of a thing that you can do with NFTs without using this pattern that I came up with, because that's not inherently tied to a user's wallet address. But what this pattern will let you do is take something like that NFT and then put it into something like this that's now it's more about like the bundling, and you can add multiple layers of value. And then it's the other piece that gets a little bit more confusing is that because you can actually execute a transaction that originates from that locker address in this case, you could actually have permissions associated with that NFT as well. So this address is allowed, like in this case, like your address is allowed to vote because you have delegated a stake on the SFC. So it could be another contract that your locker has permission to access because of whatever reasons also. So it might be that you're selling access to something through an NFT. Or it's really, it is largely about taking something that would normally be a user wallet or in a user wallet and putting it into something that can be transferred easily between people.
Okay, so I'm gonna be having to rewatch the video to completely like understand the concepts because there's just such great information here. Thinking ahead more, like with a locker, we discussed how potentially you can use that in order to gain governance to vote, and people can't see it right here, but you could like place a vote, and then there's the governance section right here. Could you technically rent out a locker to some degree and be like, guess what? I'm going to be in Hawaii for the next 3 weeks. I'm not going to be voting and taking on the bribes, no internet access. But if somebody else wants it, I'm going to let you do whatever you want for the next 2 weeks. Have fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's sort of what that approved contracts block is a little bit like. That would not just be a contract, that could actually be lots of contracts. And I have lots of random ideas all the time of how to try to improve things. But my idea for the lock is to set up an approval system so that you can delegate access by function to another contract. So maybe that is governance votes. Maybe that is being able to restake your rewards for you. So like an auto compounder kind of thing for staking rewards. Or because like think about that, you can't do that now because only a user wallet can stake, and you don't want some random person restaking for them because maybe they don't want to restake, they want to claim them. So now the only person that can restake is the person who delegated originally. In this setup, you could have somebody delegate through the NFT and then authorize somebody else to restake the rewards for them because I trust this restaker contract to do that for me. And now it's just going to constantly restake my rewards to maximize them based on whatever the transaction fees are combined with whatever else. So it totally opens up the opportunity for additional composability and functionality that doesn't exist yet. And that could be things like delegating your delegated vote. And I actually think that's something that's kind of cool because I don't know if a lot of people understand how the governance on Fantom and a lot of networks work. But when you delegate, you're actually you are delegating your vote. So all of the governance proposals are voted on based on the staked Fantom. And when you delegate to a validator, by default, you've delegated your vote to them and they can vote on your behalf. So that validator can vote for a proposal using the full voting power of the self stake plus the delegated stake of the validator. And then each individual delegator can go in and override the validator's vote if they wanted to vote differently. So the validator voted yes, and I want to vote no. I can, even though I've delegated my vote, I can still override it with my vote if I want to. One of my issues with some of the other liquid staking protocols is that you're handing that vote over to them. So like you actually don't have a say anymore. It's just their vote goes. And if they run their own validator, then they just get the full voting power of the validator. And this is all, free market. So if people decide that's what they want to do, that's fine. I didn't particularly like that idea. I thought it was like better to keep it more decentralized, let people control their own vote. And that means that you could actually, redelegate your delegation, I guess. So what I think is interesting about that is you can have your delegated stake kind of be based on securing the network, the duration of the lock, if you trust the operator, and not necessarily how that operator is going to vote on governance. So you can decide that there's like some DAO that actually aligns with how you want your governance to vote, or some person or whatever that setup ends up looking like. And now you can consolidate the voting power behind a DAO so that they can actually control a vote across maybe lots of validators through those redelegated governance votes, so that they can be more proactive about countering the validator votes that don't align with the votes that they want. And each individual doesn't have to do that on a case-by-case basis. I think there's there's interesting ways that could be put together. I think there's situations where some of it could maybe be abused, not necessarily like in an abuse way, just like not in the interest of a democratic, decentralized protocol. But I also think the flip side of that is it actually opens up a lot more opportunities to do exactly that, and like making sure that your delegated vote is voting the way that you want it to vote, even if you don't have time to vote on every single one. It helps consolidate those votes in a way that like can actually make them more influential in which proposals pass and which ones don't. So that was sort of a tangent, but yeah, Yes,
Well,
you
I'm
can
going
do
to
that.
add to the tangent and make this cosine. That's not how that works, but let's just pretend like it does. So, would it be possible then for a DAO to say, "Listen, you delegate your votes to us, and we'll take care of it, and we'll like bribe you, or we'll give you some sort of like extra incentive"? Because bribes is a pretty big thing these days, right? With the Beta
Yeah, and
attacks and what.
so that was that's it. I didn't add that piece to this diagram. I just added in the on the left there, the second from the left, delegated bribes or delegation bribes. So the idea there is that like if a validator wants to try and get people to delegate stakes to their validator so that they get additional commissions from those staking rewards, they could
Hmm.
offer people a bribe to stake to their validator and figure out what that's worth to them. And then people could, let the market decide how that works. The flip side of that is now we've sort of decoupled some of the voting from the staking rewards, from the staking position. So you're able to then, if somebody wants to if you delegate your vote to somebody and every time they vote through this contract, you get whatever,
Hmm.
totally set that up.
So it just essentially it brings up a lot of options, and naturally, we're going to quote Spider-Man here, which I guess is actually Uncle Ben. Great power comes great responsibility. So
Mm-hmm.
it seems like you're already thinking ahead as to like what could happen, what would be the benefits and the pros and cons. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
would it be possible for, let's say, an NFT to almost have like a whole checklist of conditions saying, like, you come here and you're like, okay, I'm going to mint this, and you almost as you go to a restaurant and you can check off what you want on a list, you could be like, yes, I want this, yes, I want that, no, not on those conditions, X, Y, and Z. And it's
Yeah.
like, whoa.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the idea behind the more granular permissions that I want to create. So on an NFT, typically you can either say you can approve someone to act on a token ID, or you can approve a contract to act on all token IDs that you own. But that just basically means like are you allowed to do whatever checks this function? But it's not very specific. It just says like, can you transfer it or can you burn it? Or, there's limited things that you can do with just a very standard NFT. And so what I want to do is make it more granular so that you can say this contract is allowed to vote for this token, but that's the only thing. And this one is allowed to do this, and this one's allowed to do this, and this one's allowed to do this. And that lets you delegate the voting portion to one contract, but then have the restaking stuff, set up so that a restaking contract can like compound your staking position for you. It lets it be more composable so that you can plug in pieces of functionality to each function and choose who has access to what.
All right, Justin, there is like so much that can happen here, and also the possibilities moving forward. I think this is a good time to wrap up, but is there any final statements you want to make about liquid staking and just FNFTs in general?
I mean, mostly just that I'm excited about where a lot of the stuff is going, the possibilities that it's unlocking, and I'm always interested to hear other people's ideas of other ways that this sort of pattern can be used, whether it's with staking or some other protocols. But in general, I think it's just really exciting to see um, the technology kind of getting pushed forward in creative ways that NFTs are being used that people aren't necessarily used to seeing, but that I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of soon.
Yeah. Do you think like this is going to potentially get used on different blockchains as well, not just on Phantom?
I mean, I would think so. I think that there's definitely some creative, uses of this that even if you don't necessarily have native staking rewards on, say, Ethereum, you do still have curve tokens and other like tokens that are locked to an address. And like what Revest is doing, and some of the other stuff that I talked about with whether it's bundling NFTs or bundling other tokens, like those sort of ideas are definitely applicable to other chains. So I would think this sort of pattern you might see. And and I didn't mention this earlier, but this isn't uh, I didn't come up with this 100% on my own. This is from doing research on other projects, other protocols. This isn't something that I like just pulled from one place or anything, but it's there's lots of other contracts out there that have like little pieces of this, minimal proxies and using the token ID to create a deployment address. And some of the ephemeral deployment stuff was in some loot box contracts that I found that were Ethereum based. So I think a lot of this stuff is just iterative, and you see people building on top of other things. So I would think some of this may exist or is being developed right now on other chains. I'm not totally sure, but I would think that it's interesting enough that you'll probably see some implementations on other chains too.
Sure. So what if other people want to follow the status of this? Like what's going on with the code? How's it going to be deployed? How's it going to be used? Is it going to be used by certain projects? Is this going to be like more open source so that any project can step in?
Yeah, so far I've been posting the sort of development progress on my Twitter. I've been making a little thread. So if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, you can see the updates that I post there. And if you have any ideas, feel free to reach out and let me know. And I'm happy to integrate any sort of creative new stuff into it. And so it's not the idea. I haven't really fully thought out like a launch plan or anything like that. But the idea is that it is available for users to access, and it's really meant to be sort of like an easy way to interact with the staking. I'm probably going to end up, or I am working with PaintSwap, and they're obviously interested in all sorts of NFT marketplace stuff. So this is, like I was talking about, there would be a desire for there to be some sort of marketplace. So working with marketplaces to do that, I think, makes sense. But it's meant to sort of be accessible to everybody, and then also be composable by other protocols if they wanted to plug stuff into it.
Amazing work. Wow, the innovation that's happening, mind-boggling. So definitely give this man a follow out there on Twitter. You can also check him out on Fantom Unchained. He is very frequently on there, sipping on some coffee. I hope.
Still got my cup.
Still got it from that day. Yeah, from just 3 hours ago. Absolutely. So definitely check him out on there. And as mentioned, like this guy ain't no joke. He definitely knows his stuff. So if you're a developer and you want to help out, kind of push the envelope on innovation, definitely check him out. Likewise, please subscribe and like this video, because when I see the little notifications, ooh, it gives me motivation to keep going and bring on amazing people just like Justin. And I look forward to doing more videos. And with that being said, see you guys in the next video. Pieces.